Okay, welcome everybody to Maximizing Labor Inventory. Now, if you've taken a fair bit of training from me before, this is not going to be brand new information to you. It is a session I wanted to do specifically for the area of Hanover, where we're going to be doing some training, and I wanted to give people a sense of my training itself. In Canada, I'm really well known for the articles that I wrote over the years, of about 90 different articles with a couple national magazines across the country, but not a massive amount of training. The bulk of my training was actually in the US. And so people have not necessarily taken much training from me in Canada, but have read the articles. So I wanted to give an introduction to this. Now, some of the people online, you took training from me many, many years ago in Up and Owen Sound. And again, some of this may not be new to you. Jeff, you could get pretty close to teaching this already. But Zach, the reason I really wanted you on is because I think this is really good big picture stuff to start, so that we can get you set up for the training that you're going to be taking, the live training in Toronto, which is a 2-day service advisor class. And I will be briefly talking about the Hanover class and just briefly about the Toronto class that are coming up in September. Of all the things that I teach, and this is my 31st year of training, is maximizing labor inventory is without a doubt the most important thing to focus on. If you don't sell the labor, you don't sell the other things that go along with that. Labor sells everything that you sell. Parts don't sell labor, labor sells inventory. Labor sells everything else, including the parts, the sublet, the tires, the towing, the shop supplies, and environmental fees. A person comes into your shop, it almost always starts with some kind of labor. Maybe it's an inspection, maybe it's a diagnosis because the person doesn't know what's wrong with the vehicle. We tracked it with a management group that I ran in Seattle several years back. And I asked people, here's what I'd like you to do. I would like you to, and I'm going to encourage you to do the same thing. Maybe you take the entire month of September and track this one thing. And Jeff's going, another thing to track on my plate, so is Patty. But the idea is that you just simply, little chart there with just, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, crossing that off, is what number of vehicles that came into your shop, let's say in the month of September, needed to be diagnosed or inspected before you could do any work on it. Now, I've asked that question. Some people say 100%. That's not really accurate, because if I come to your shop for an oil change because I'm due for an oil change, you don't need to inspect that before you do the oil change. Now, you're going to do an inspection every car, every time. And by the way, Jeff, Patty's been quoting you a lot whenever people the other day said, should I pull the wheels? Every car, every time. And she gets frustrated, keep on getting asked that question. Personally, I think there should be an inspection form, whether it's on a tablet or a checklist, where people will always know every single time everything that needs to be done, and they hand in that sheet. So they go through the checklist and it becomes habit. But if I come to your shop for a tire rotation because I need it, or I'm coming in to have my winter tires put on or taken off or whatever, you don't need to inspect. That needs to be done. Winter's coming, it needs to be done. Now, maybe you'll do an inspection every time, every car, but it doesn't mean that you need to do the inspection or the diagnosis for something that's coming in. If I come in for a 60,000 mile or a 96,000 case service because I want it done because the manufacturer is recommending it, you don't need to diagnose that before. You don't need to inspect it. And yes, part of that is an inspection. Check, 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 inspect, 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 replace, replace, replace is what they tell us. So part of that's an inspection, but we don't need to do an inspection to start doing that kind of work. So just so you know, we tracked it with that group in Seattle. And what they said was 83% on average, some people a little higher, some people a little less. If you're on a main road with a lot of traffic going by and have more drop-in business, then of course it's going to be higher because people already have something wrong with their vehicle. But it was 83% for that group on average. So I'm going to encourage you to do that for September. And the question is, how much of that time did you get paid for? So what I said to that group, and I believe it was September we started the meeting, and then I came back the next time and I said, okay, what was it? 83%. Everybody gave their input. And then I said, now what I'd like you to do is go back to your shop. It was a 2-day class, so let us know tomorrow what percentage of your invoices had diagnostic or inspection fees on them. Not that we charge for every single inspection we do. We do a walk around inspection when the vehicle arrives. Hopefully that's different. But what amount of time did you actually charge diagnostic fees on the work order? And it was somewhere in the neighborhood of 30%. So it makes me wonder how much diagnostics time we don't get paid for. That's a whole other section, topic in and of itself. I find it's about a 3-hour workshop just to teach that part of it. But the question is, how much of the labor inventory that you have available to you are you selling? And I've had several people, many people, more than several dozens, maybe hundreds, said, Kelly, one of the things that you said that simplified this for me, and I apologize to people who've heard this a lot from me, but some people are hearing it for the very first time, or Zach, you may have heard it from your dad. And that is this: 8 o'clock in the morning, you are at your counter, and in comes your part supplier, and they bring in 8 spark plugs, and you count them. Yes, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they were arrived at the shop 8 o'clock in the morning, and that day, 4 of those were installed in a customer's vehicle. But at the end of the day, the other ones that you saw there on the counter in the morning are gone. They're just gone. They didn't fall on the floor. You can't find them at all. And you think, I don't know where they went. And then the next day, you get 8 tires dropped off at your shop at 8 o'clock in the morning, and you count them: 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And that day 4 were installed in a customer's vehicle. And at the end of the day, the other 4 that you saw there in the morning that you signed for, that you're paying for, are just gone. How long would it take the average owner to freak out to find out where these plugs or tires are going, day 1 or day 2? Well, it would be day 1. Sadly, at 8 o'clock in the morning in most repair shops in North America, around the world, technicians show up usually at about 8 o'clock in the morning. They're there for about 8 hours. So you have 8 hours of inventory. Just like in the morning you had 8 spark plugs or you had 8 tires, you had 8 hours. It showed up at 8 o'clock in the morning, and they were there usually 8 hours, maybe a little longer, depending on lunch. But what we're talking about with inventory is what we call warm body in premise, the amount of hours that technician is in your shop, excluding lunch. Coffee breaks are part of that time. Smoke breaks are part of that time. Cleanup, comebacks are all part of that time. You're going to see that shortly here. But you've got 8 hours of inventory. The question is, how many of those hours are you selling? And I sent out the flyer. Well, it was in the base of the email. I tried something new. I ran it by Patty, who's in our management group. I said, what do you think of this? It's just shortening it so it's not too long. People's attention spans these days are extremely short. And so you all received the email that explained what the session was about. And so I said in one of them, I came up with something fancier that had a 55% with a little graphic. It looked pretty neat. And the other one said 60. But just so you know, the average shop is actually somewhere between 45 and 60%. I spent an hour on the phone with a fellow this morning who has a huge labor leak. You would not tolerate selling 4 spark plugs out of 8, and yet the average shop only sells maybe 4 or 5 hours out of the 8 that were available, and don't wonder what happened with that. You are a labor factory. There's a great trainer in the US. I got to know him really well. Vin Waterhouse is his name, and he wrote a workshop called The Labor Factory. Now, I know we don't like the term factory, and it sounds like, children working in a factory, but the concept is very good. We're a labor factory. We buy and sell labor every single day. You buy parts, you mark them up for desired gross profit, and you sell them. And every single day you buy time from technicians. You give them money, they give you time. If you stop paying your employees, they're going to stop coming to work. And if they stop coming to work, you're going to stop paying them. You buy their time, and you mark that up, what you pay them, to become your labor rate. Labor rates are not really determined by what other shops in the area charge. It's based on gross profit, and just for the record, we're looking at 70 to 75% gross profit on that labor. Labor is truly a cost of goods sold. I've had accountants disagree with me. They go, time, you can't. It's not possible to have cost of goods sold because time is not a good. But in reality, it is. It's something you buy every single day. You mark that up and you sell it for a desired gross profit. So if you buy 8 spark plugs, the goal is to sell 8. If you buy 8 hours, and by the way, I want to make this clear. When I say buy 8, if the employee is flat rate, or what we call performance-based paid, and they're only paid for the work they sell, that's got nothing to do with this conversation. What we're saying is you have 8 hours of inventory. whether you're paying for that or not, those 8 hours of inventory on average, again, some a little bit more, some a little bit less, but your goal is to sell the hours that were available to you. And the sad part about it, again, is the average shop is only selling 4 to 5 hours. And on the session last week, we covered what we call the power of team. And I've done that exercise with literally tens of thousands of shops. I've been all across Canada many times, all 50 states, worked with tens of thousands of shops. And I can tell you that the average independent repair shop is not good at selling labor. In fact, we suck at it. I had a fellow in Ontario who took training from me probably 1996 in there, 95, 96. And now I've been training his son for the last several years, so I'm starting to feel old. I have people say, my dad took your class, and one day it'll be my grandfather took your class. But he told me, he said, Kelly, I didn't understand labor inventory. We always had our technicians' wages as an expense because that's what we were taught by an accountant. And he said, when I realized that technicians' labor, what you pay for the wages, and by that I just mean just direct wages. We're not talking about in Canada EI, CPP, workers' comp holiday pay, or in the States SUDA and FUDA and workers' comp. Those are not part of it. What you want to know is what did you pay as a direct wage, and then you mark that up, which becomes a labor rate. And he said that made sense to me. When I took my technicians' wages out of expense and put it under a cost of goods sold, and now I saw my gross profit in the labor, that made sense. And he said, here's what I've learned. When you sell the labor, you sell everything else to go along with it. And I know that sounds simple. And in my career, I've heard many, many times that, I just lost my train of thought there for a second, is about the labor inventory. And of course, if you don't sell the labor inventory, you're not selling the other things that go along with that. And most people in independent repair shops, unfortunately, are not tracking that. They're not seeing how many hours. They know how many hours there or how many hours they paid for, but they're not really seeing what happened with the time. So we're going to show you some information that we believe is extremely important. And back to the fellow in Ontario, he said, if you sell the labor, you sell everything else. If you don't sell the labor, you don't sell anything else. Give you an example of that. When I train a parts company, and I've had parts companies hire me to go in and teach their corporate people, their salespeople, their counter people about being a repair shop and what it's like. And those people, I say at the beginning of the session, your average customer, your average independent repair shop is only buying half as many parts as they should. And I don't mean they're buying half from you and some from other people. I'm saying that the average shop only buys half of the parts they could for the number of people they have. Because if you don't sell the labor, you're not selling the parts to go along with that. Now, we have some people online that sell parts over the counter, and that's something completely different. That's a separate income stream of your business. We're talking about a typical repair shop. And I know it sounds simple, and I've had people say to me, as I just mentioned, but you make it sound simple. You make it sound so simple. Well, in reality, it's not so much about being simple. And Patty, if you could just see what that chat is. Okay, yeah, somebody got really busy and needs to go. I understand that. Yes, I will be sending out the link. I've had people say you make it sound simple. And, we've all heard the expression, maybe we've used it, that it's easier said than done. Now, when you think about that, that is really a very silly expression. It makes no sense. What is easier to do than say? I mean, it's easy for me to say I can walk out to the grocery store. It's easier to say it than do it. Even walking across the room, it's easier to say I'm going to go get a cup of coffee than actually get the cup of coffee. So everything in life is easier said than done. So it's a really silly expression. But I know what people mean. What they mean is you make it sound simple. And in reality, what we're going to look at here is simple. Sell the labor inventory. And the bottom line is, how do you make more money? How do you make sure your gross profit and your labor is there, your overall gross profit and your net profit? Is you need to have your technicians spend more time working on income producing work and be faster at it. And again, I know that sounds simple, and it is simple, but it's not easy. There's a massive difference between simple and easy. Spend more time working on cars, be faster at it is simple, but actually doing it is not simple. because the average owner, the average manager in any business, not just ours, is interrupted 232 times a day. You ever go to your shop in the morning, you've got your to-do list, you're busy pulled in every direction throughout the day. And at the end of the day, you look at your to-do list and nothing is ticked off except you, because we end up doing urgent things rather than important things. There's a really good book written on that subject I read many years ago, how that too often we get caught up in urgent tasks and not necessarily important ones. And I don't know about you, but being an achiever, I want to get stuff done. When that happens, you think about what you did do, add it to the to-do list, check it off for the pure satisfaction that you got something done from your list, and we're fooling ourselves. So it's not easy, but it is very simple. And the point is, what are you doing? What systems do you have in place to track that inventory? Here's a question actually I haven't asked in a long time. Sometimes I think back of things I used to ask, or people say, remember you used to say that? I thought I haven't said that in years. But here's a question I used to ask people all the time in live sessions. How much part inventory do you have back at your shop? Now, when I started 31 years ago, people had a lot more part inventory than today because it's just in time delivery. Now, if you're really close to a parts store, then you don't need as much inventory. If you're 20 some miles or 30 kilometers away, then maybe you're going to need more. But I would ask people, how much part inventory do you have at your shop? And people would say, I don't know, 20,000, 10,000, 5,000, including tires or whatever. And then I'd say, but how much labor inventory do you have at your shop this month? What's the amount of hours that you have available in labor inventory? You want to sell all the parts that you bought. Maybe the shrinkage of parts might be a reasonable amount, 1%. When I have parts people in a class, I'll say, could you imagine in your shop, if you were like a repair shop and you had only 45% of your inventory and the rest of it disappeared, or you sold 55 and 45 disappeared, a parts store would not be able to stay in business. It wouldn't be possible. In an average parts store, I'm told it's less than 0.5% shrinkage. But in an average repair shop, again, the shrinkage sometimes is 50%. Without exaggerating, a lot of times, and I say many times, the majority of times, I look at people's data and say, you know what, you could do as much in labor sales in a month with half as many people. I have a brand new client who just happens to be open 7 days a week, thinks he needs to be open 7 days a week. And the problem with that is when it comes to labor inventory, he thinks he has more labor inventory, and he doesn't. If you're open Saturday, for example, and your employee, one of them who works that Saturday, maybe they rotate, is off on Monday, it's still 40 hours. You're going to take the 40 hours and put it into 5 days a week. You're going to put it into 6 days a week. In his case, it's 7 days a week. The employee will be off 2 days during the week to be working there on Saturday and Sunday. So the amount of hours is absolutely identical. Now, some people say, well, I don't do that. I have them, but they're on overtime. So then maybe they work 2 Saturdays a month or whatever. I had a shop recently, they're spending $126,000 US dollars a year just in overtime so they could be open Saturdays. So that's not a good way of doing it. But same thing with spreading out the labor inventory. That would be like, let's say I have a computer store, and you come in and say, oh, I'd really like to buy that laptop. Oh, no, sorry, this laptop is being set aside to sell on Saturday. I can't sell it to you today because I'm hoping somebody will come in on Saturday. So if you take 8 hours out of your Monday to put it into Saturday, that's 8 hours that you can't sell on the Monday. So when we're talking about labor inventory, we're talking about the number of hours. And if you stretch that into 6 or 7 days a week, that's quite silly. And so having said that, I have some, not many, but I have some clients that are open 4 days only, and they work 4 10-hour days. And there's some great things about that. I won't get into the detail. Some people really like that, and they're attracted to work at a shop that does that. But 4 10-hours a day or 10-hour days is still 40 hours in a week. So some people do the 40 in 4 days, some people do it in 5, some people 6, and some people, unfortunately, in 7. So labor inventory, again, the average shop is only about 55%, somewhere between 45 and 60%. So on this next page, I said that the key to maximizing labor sales is your time management. And I can tell you, and I'll be very clear, independent repair shops suck, and I mean really suck, at time management. It really does require a time clock of some kind. It could be the drudgery of the old time clock. It could be the the 3-part card. I was speaking with 2 shops just recently, one this morning for about an hour, whose sales per month per technician is terrible. It's horrible. I won't get into the math of it, but it's really bad. And I said, but you are not tracking the time correctly. And what they're doing is they have their technicians with a time clock punch on the back of the work order. That is a lesson in frustration. That is not a good way to do it. If you're going to use a manual punch, and that compared to a lot of shop management systems these days have time clocks built right into the software, and the tech should at least have a tablet or a computer at each bay, and when they see their job, they punch in, and when the labor operation is done, they can clock out of that and into the next one. It's not good enough just to do punch in and out of each vehicle, and I'll explain that shortly. But the problem is, if you're not tracking that, you truly don't know what happened to the time. So if you're selling 5 hours out of 8 in a day, the question is, what happened to the 3 hours that you didn't get paid for? Now, the worst is when you spent the time, or your tech spent that time working and you didn't get paid for it. I mean, if you're not going to make money, why work? Go home and spend time with the kids. By the way, that shop that's losing money in 7 days a week, they're losing money. I'm talking about, well, the worst cash flow problem I've ever seen in any business. People say I have a little cash flow problem. It's not a little problem, it's a big problem. But it's the worst I've seen. And I said, my first goal as your coach, my first goal is to teach you how to lose money in 5 days a week rather than 7. And I know that's a bit sarcastic, but the problem is they're not tracking the time. So back to the fellow I was speaking this morning, he has his technicians punch just once on the back of the work order, which again is a lesson in frustration, because I know what that is like, and I've seen people do that. If you want to do a time study, then what you need to do is have each of the work orders that the technicians punched into, because there's no other copy of that. It's not in your shop management system. It's not on your time cards. We used to use the 3-part time card, which is a good system. If you're not going to use it in your shop management system, it sounds crazy, but I would recommend that you go back to the time card with the 3, and you can buy them from Reynolds or whatever. Now, it's a bit archaic, but it's a lot better than punching in on the work order. So now, if you want to see what happened, then you need to go through the work orders that are in whatever order, maybe the way they were done, maybe the way they were invoiced to the customer or whatever. So you have to flip those over and say, okay, this was the one he started at 8:07. And by the way, one thing I'd love to know is how many technicians actually start the day with a coffee break. They're supposed to be there at 8, ready to go at 8, uniforms on, coffee in them, cigarettes in them, all that stuff. But some people get there at 8 and they chit chat for a little while and have a cup of coffee. I've seen techs actually eating cereal in the bays and crazy stuff like that. And if you ever track your technician's time per minute value, then you realize that it's a waste of money to be able to do that. Anyway, on the back of the work order, that means you need to go through and say, okay, this guy started at 8 o'clock and worked on that, punched out there at 9:20. Okay, let me find the next one. Okay, so I don't know why there was a gap, but this one he punched in at 9:43 and then punched in another. Plus, you've got work orders that are not separated by tech. So you're going through, and the question is, who punched that? And you have to look back at the other side. It is so much work. I'm going to say that if you're going to, it would be better to not punch in at all on the back of a work order. A shop I was in just recently claimed that they had a labor rate of whatever dollars. I won't mention that for the US people that are online. Can't really do that. But they had a higher diagnostic rate. And when I did this calculation for them, I said, you are only selling less than 60% of your time. You could do, some months was 50, some months was actually closer to 50, where I said you could do as much work with half as many people. But he said, we do charge a higher diagnostics time. Well, I calculated their effective labor rate, which was horrific. And I said, I don't understand. If you have a higher diagnostic rate, why is your effective labor rate so much lower? And I said, if you're looking at the back of work orders, or in this case, they were punching on a single time card that weren't 3 copies. So they would go through that, but the techs punched in and out of each vehicle, not out of each labor operation. So I said, okay, look at this time card right in front of you for this guy that worked on these vehicles yesterday. How much of that was diagnostics time? You don't know. You know that he punched in and out of this vehicle, but you don't know how much of that was diagnostics time. He said, you know, you're right. We don't charge a diagnostic rate because we can't really tell. Whereas in a shop management system that has a time clock, which, by the way, a lot of people have that capability and simply don't use it, which is just, again, quite crazy. Anyway, so what you need to know in order for you to maximize your labor sales is that every single day this happens at your shop. There are 4 types of time. The first is available time, or what we say AVL, which is the total time, which again, as I mentioned a few times, is usually 8 hours a day that a technician is available, and we call that warm body in premise. Now, I'm not trying to make fun of them and say they're just a warm body. That's not what I mean. But I want to be very clear that what we're talking about here is the amount of time that they are in there excluding lunch. They don't punch out for a coffee break. They don't punch out for a smoke break. They don't punch out to text or go to the bathroom. All they do is punch out for lunch. So available time is the amount of time they're there excluding lunch. And most people who pay hourly, that's the amount of time you're paying them in a day. Most shops is 8 hours. The actual time is actually the money-making time. To simplify this even further, although we do need to look at these 4 calculations, is there's only 2 kinds of time for your technicians in a day. There's making money time or there's losing money time. There's no neutral. It's either you're making money or you're losing money. And if you calculate your technician's time per minute value, which I'll throw that out there, is simply taking your labor rate and you multiply it by 2, because when you are selling labor, an hour's worth of labor, on average, you should be selling an equal amount of parts, sublet, tires, towing, shop supplies, and environmental fees. Now, I know sometimes it's an inspection, there's no parts, there's diagnostics and no parts, which is why you need to charge more for those. We can't get into that right now. But if you took what you would charge in an average hour, multiply that by 2, most hours would be 1 hour of labor and 1 hour equal in dollars of everything else. So you take your labor rate, multiply it by 2, and divide it by 60 minutes in the hour and see what every single minute is worth in your shop. Now, if you've got 3 techs, or we've got a new client that has 5 technicians, well, if your technician time per minute value is about $3 a minute, and you got 5 technicians, we're talking $15 every single minute. Either we're making $15 an hour or we're losing it. Now, I have some people say, well, no, I only pay them $20 an hour. No. Yes, you're paying them $20 an hour plus the payroll benefits and burdens to go along with that. But what could you have made in that time that they weren't doing something that was money-making time? So in reality, of the available time that they are there, there's only 2 kinds of time: making money time, losing money time. That's all there is. And having said that, something that just comes to mind here is scary math here, is that let's say you pay a technician $20 an hour plus the payroll benefits and burdens. But let's just deal with the $20, the base amount. And you pay them $20 an hour times 8 hours in a day. But what happens if in that day you only sell 4 hours? What did it cost you? $40 an hour for every hour that you sold. So when you're not selling the time, it's a massive sacrifice of gross profit. Now, if they're flat rate, that changes. And I'm not saying you should switch to flat rate. There's really no way to say which is better. I've asked groups which is better. And there's advantages and disadvantages of each. In a nutshell, my experiences with most hourly people, not all, but with most hourly people, you need to motivate them. And with flat rate or performance-based paid technicians, you really need to moderate them. There's a difference there. But back to this. So again, if you're paying $20 an hour, but you only sell 4 hours, then it's $40 an hour. If you only sell 5 hours, then you calculate that if it's 6 hours, what did it cost you for each hour that you sold? So that gets to be some scary math. If your labor rate is $100 an hour and you're paying a tech 20, that's 80% GP, that's great. But if you only sold 4 hours a day, so that's half the money going out the door just to pay for the cost of goods sold, which is crazy. So the actual time is money-making time. It's the time the technician is spent on income-producing work. And I make this clear, that excludes any comebacks, any company vehicles, anything that is a vehicle that wasn't generating money at that time. So again, if it's a comeback, then it's costing you $3 a minute or $4 a minute, whatever your labor rate is. So that's not actual time. But any time that you're spent punched into a vehicle that's working on stuff that makes money is considered actual time. The third is the sold time, which is super simple, is the time that the customer is charged for. Then there's what we call the expense time or the E time. In some sessions with our time cards, we call it NP. If you've taken training, you may have seen that. NP is non-productive or non-profitable time, whatever you want to call it. But the amount of time that was spent that was not paid for. So it is pretty simple here that the actual time, making money time, and the E time, losing money time, the total of those is the available time. So if the tech's there 8 hours in a day and you only sell 6, what happened to the 2 hours that was not accounted for? And that's another problem of punching into a simple time card, just a one-page one, or at the back of a work order. What do you do with the time that was not money-making time? Was it waiting for work? Was it waiting for the advisor? Was it comebacks? What was it that caused us to not get paid for that time? So the total time in the day, the available time, is made up of actual time, making money, E time, losing money time. And some of those non-productive times could include things like waiting for parts, waiting for customers' authorization, waiting for work because there's no customers in yet. The tech started at 8, the customers are coming in at 8, the advisor's too busy. It could be that they're taking training. Maybe they're filling in for the advisor owner because they had to leave. Maybe it's a comeback, which is the fault of the tech, a warranty, which is the fault of the part. Working on company vehicles, leasehold improvements, that's rare, but it can happen, and paid vacations and holidays. So again, actual time is making money time, E time is losing money time. The total of those two is going to be your available time. The question is, if you know that you only sold 5 hours today, and by the way, you don't need a time clock to track that. You know how many sold hours at the end of the day, and you know how many hours were available. So that's called proficiency, which is the percentage of time that you sold. But if you only sold 5 hours out of 8 or 5.5 or 6, the question is what happened to the rest of that time? So if proficiency, you don't need a time clock for. And I've had people argue with me and say you can back it in. No, you can't. You can try, but it's going to be one of two things, productivity or efficiency. And of course, productivity is predominantly management's responsibility. Efficiency is predominantly the tech's responsibility. I'll spend a little bit of time on that just in a few minutes when we get to those calculations. But if you're not selling the time, the question is, was it a productivity time? Was it an efficiency time, or both? If you are not selling the labor inventory that we're talking about, if you're not selling that, it's one of two things. It's a productivity problem, an efficiency problem, or both. And again, that's simple, but again, it's not easy because we're humans and it's tough to be human, right? So we need to track these three calculations. If you as a technician have worked in a dealership, most likely, not 100% of the time, but probably 90, you punched in. Now today it could be electronic time clock system where they use the maybe a barcode system, or the kind of key codes that you use in a hotel that are magnetized. The tech walks up, swipes that, it goes into the repair order that they're working on, or work order if you want to call it that in Canada. And then when that's done, they get pulled off that job, or they're waiting for a part, then they swipe out. It's always a double punch or a double swipe, always. I started something, and then when I'm done that, I punch out of that job and I punch into whatever the next one is. You need to know what happened to the time that was not money-making time. So productivity is the amount of time that a technician spends actually working on income-producing work. That's the money-making time. How do you calculate it? You take the actual time, how much time did they spend working on stuff that made money, and you divide that by the available time. How many hours were they there? Warm body and premise. Our benchmark is 90%. Now, to make this really clear on what this is, I've read articles, I've heard some other trainers say, well, our productivity is 105%, or your productivity needs to be 120%. I'm not sure what they're talking about, but it can't be productivity. The true definition of productivity is how much time of the day did they spend working on stuff that made money. The highest that could possibly be is 100. We've got Jeff on board here. If I was working for you, Jeff, and I was at your shop for 8 hours, excluding lunch, and you say, hey, Kelly, how much time did you spend actually working on stuff that made money today? I see, by the way, there's a typo there, PF instead of OF. But some stuff you see on screen that you don't see on paper. But and I say, Jeff, I spent 12 hours today, or 9 hours today, or 9.5. That sounds good, and I'm all motivated and everything, but it's impossible. I love when people say, oh, I give you 125%. That's impossible. People say that, and they're all motivated and inspired, but it's not possible. If I'm at your shop, Jeff, for 8 hours, the most amount of time that I could have spent is 8 hours working on stuff that made money, which is essentially impossible. That would mean that you hired non-smoking technicians. Nobody smoked or let them smoke when they're working on cars, which I've seen, which is horrible. Not so much these days, but used to be more common. You'd have to install catheters, which, something like that maybe Jeff has considered. Hey, let's get some catheters so that can save us some time. I'm kidding. But the highest it could possibly be is 100, and we cannot expect our technicians to spend every single minute of every single day working on stuff that makes money. Our goal is 90, which means only 10% of the day is wasted. Efficiency is how fast the technician is. The calculation here is simple. Sold time, how much time do we get paid for? Not by the hours there, that's the next one, but by the actual time spent. So the question is, did the technician beat the time? So if the technician got a job that was, let's say, a 60,000 mile or a 96,000 K service on a Toyota, whatever, and let's say for simple illustration that the sold time was 4 hours, but Zach's done that job so many times, he's going to get it done in 3. Why? Because he's good at it. So you got paid for 4 and only spent 3. Now, some people have a problem with that. They go, that's not fair. You should only charge people for how long the job took. Years and years ago, shortly after I started working in the U.S., there was something called the NAG report. I had a copy of it at the time. I remember like it was yesterday. It had a green cover. And it was the National Attorneys General report on the automotive industry. And they wanted to change the law for repair shops that you could not have time estimating guides. It would be illegal. Those would be thrown away. There would be no Mitchell on Demand, no All Data. Back in the day, we used the books, Chilton, I think is what it was, all those brown books. And you would not be able to use those. What they wanted is that it would be fairer, they said, is shops charge you for how long a book tells you rather than how long the technician took. And we believe that's not fair. And we believe that you should be required by law to have a punch clock. I mean, I read this document. You should have a time clock that if it took 80 minutes and you can only charge the person 80 minutes. Well, first of all, that would mean you could never estimate a job to a customer up front because you wouldn't know what you're going to charge them until the job is actually done. Secondly, they thought that if you charge for the time rather than the book time, that would be fair, which would mean the slowest technicians would make the most amount of money. The slowest shops, the shops with the laziest technicians, the ones without really good tools and equipment would make more money. I mean, you could open up a shop called Slow Joe's and fix cars ever so slowly because the slower you were, the more money you'd make. And I mean, why have air tools when you could just use wrenches? I mean, why have a lift? Those cost a lot of money. You could just use floor jacks. I mean, that would work as well. Why would you have diagnostic equipment? Why have a smoke machine when you could just do it other ways and take a lot longer to do it? The point is that why would you become better? Why would you go to training to learn how to do something faster and better? Why would you buy tools to make it faster and better? That would mean the shops that were the best would make the least amount of money. And people would obviously abuse that system and just say, well, have a cigarette now, just take your time, punch in later, punch out later. And that's what the lawyers want to see. Well, of course, it was fought by organizations like ASA and a bunch of others, and it never did become law. But it helps you understand why we need to get paid more when the job is done faster, because it costs you money. It cost the technician experience. It cost you to go to training. You had to take the time away from the shop to go to training, or you went at night. You paid for the training itself. You bought, $60,000, $70,000 worth of tools. I mean, some techs have $20,000 and $30,000 toolboxes. I'd love to see a picture of your toolbox sometime, Jeff. I suspect you've got a lot, Zach, as well. And sometimes the boxes are 20 and 30.
Kelly, we just lost your sound.
You lost my sound? Okay, can you just let me know when you get it back? That's really strange to have that happen. Can you hear me, Patty?
Yeah, you're back.
Okay, so I'm just going to try to put here. That's a very rare thing to happen. Okay, so I'm not sure what the last thing you heard me say was, but okay, I just lost my train of thought there because of the distraction.
You were talking
Oh,
about.
yeah, I know. Okay, I'm back. And so the faster you get, the more you should make, the more, the more you spend to become better and better as a shop. And of course, the whole ethical thing, you want to be the absolute best that you can be at what you're doing. And so back to this. So it's about making sure that you get the job done faster because of course you're going to make more money. And by the way, for some of you that work on fleets, the shop that I just mentioned, which is a new client that just happens, yeah, that's getting paid for somewhere between 50, some months was a little less, but the average is 50 to 60% of the time. One of the issues there is they work on a lot of fleets. And as a lot of you know, fleets don't necessarily have, for these bigger trucks, time estimating guides. So you charge how long the job actually takes. Well, the problem with that is the better you get, the less you make, because it didn't take as much. It didn't take as much time. You went off to a Mark LeMay class. He's a brilliant tech. You thought, oh my God, that guy knows this stuff. You come back, you implement it, you get it done faster. And this particular shop has a technician that's not quite walking on water, but he's brilliant. He's really good at what he does. And they've got some amazing, amazing equipment. And I said, here's the problem. The better he is, the less you make. And if all you do is at the end say, well, it took him 2 hours, we're going to charge for 2. What I recommend is take the actual time that that brilliant technician spent. Now, you may not do this with, a C-Tech or, an apprentice up here in Canada, but if you've got some really brilliant technicians and you've got work that's you can't find a time estimating guide time on that, I told him, you need to take the time he spent. If it was 2 hours, multiply it by 1.25. You need to build the efficiency into the job. He said, is that fair? I said, is working harder and making less fair? Is buying equipment? He had bought some new Snap-on stuff. I mean, just amazing state-of-the-art stuff. We're just talking about a month ago. Cost a massive amount of money. And now he's using that piece of equipment. It gets done faster and he should make less. Like, why buy the equipment is my point. So if that's the case and you're working on anything that is not time estimating guide time, I suggest that you multiply it by, in this case, 1.25, and it's absolutely fair. Proficiency is something you don't need a time clock for. You don't need a time card for. You don't need to track this in your shop management system when they started on a vehicle, when they ended. Proficiency is how much time of the day was sold. Proficiency is simply a combination of productivity and efficiency. Proficiency is the percentage of labor inventory that you sold. Back to the illustration of the spark plugs. If you bought 8 and you sold 4, your proficiency, in this case it's labor, inventory, which is proficiency, but is, you could call it shrinkage. What happened to the 4 hours that we were here that we didn't sell? It's the same thing. What percentage of the parts did we sell at the end of the day, the month, the end of the year, the quarter? And the question is, how much of the labor did we sell by the end of that day or whatever? So if your proficiency is low, if you sold 6 hours out of 8, that means you have 1 or 2, I should say, or maybe a combination. You have a productivity problem. The tech simply did not spend as much of that 8 hours working on vehicles as they should have, or efficiency, they simply were not fast enough with it. So it's a matter of one of the two or both. It could be a productivity problem, it can be efficiency problem. And again, I've had people challenge me and say, Kelly, you don't need a time clock. You see the proficiency. At the end of the day, we see how many hours were sold divided by how many hours available. Well, that doesn't take into consideration the effect of labor, eh? Because what you say you charge and how much you actually charge are 2 totally different things. Plus, is it a productivity problem? Is it an efficiency problem? Now, for the most part, productivity is the tech's responsibility. It's their job to stay busy on income-producing work. Now, if the cars aren't there, that's management's fault. If we're waiting for parts, that's probably not the technician's fault. Productivity is far more, sorry, I said that incorrectly. Productivity is far more management and service advisors' responsibility. and efficiency is mainly the tech. But it's not that black and white. It's not 100% of each. If I'm a tech working for you and I'm really good tech, but you only sell several oil changes today and some tires, the efficiency is not going to be great. But if I'm a decent tech and you sell, 3 maintenance services today, you sell some cooling system flushes or any other kind of flush or a factory recommended service, then my efficiency is going to be a lot higher. But the techs are responsible for their efficiency. How fast they are they motivated? Are they trained? Are they inspired? Do they care? Do they have a sense of urgency? Some techs work so slowly that if they were walking, they would be actually going backwards because they're so slow at what they do. But most technicians are quite efficient. In fact, one of the people on this call, at your shop, your productivity is not great because of car count, but when the techs are working on things, they are super efficient. And in some cases, we've seen where it's almost 200%, not every day, all day, but there are times in that shop where we see the efficiency 125, 150, 175. So the point is, there's not a lot of work, but when the work's there, we're really fast. Now, that's not always the case, because some people pace themselves based on how much work is there. So I might milk this job because time will go by faster if I've got something to do. But if there's this sense of urgency, and by the way, that's another issue with some shops that are open Saturday and Sunday. Sometimes that means instead of picking up the pace, I should say, on the Friday, having a sense of urgency because it needs to be done today, the customer's going to pick up the vehicle. But if we're open tomorrow, we can just finish that tomorrow. So you all understand what I mean by the sense of urgency. Some people have it, some people do not. So proficiency, if the time is not sold, it's really simple, but not easy. It's a productivity problem. We did not spend enough time working on income producing work, or we weren't fast enough, or a combination of the two. And if you only sold 6 hours a day, how do you know if it was productivity or efficiency? A time clock or a time card system or a shop management system that has a time clock on it. Again, I spent over an hour with a client this morning that kind of uses a time management system, but it gets punched on the back of a work order, like I mentioned, which means at the end of the day, he or somebody else, maybe the advisor, has to go through all of those work orders and try to figure out what happened. And even if you add up all the time, it'll tell you productive time, but it doesn't tell you efficiency time, and it doesn't allow you to see what happened when there was no work or waiting for parts or whatever it was. At the end of the day, you need to know the total money-making time, the total losing money time. The total of that is the total time that they were there, and find out what happened to non-productive time. What happened when we were losing money rather than making money, and what can we do tomorrow to make sure that we increase the productivity and spend more time working on income-producing work. And by the way, one thing that's infinitely worse than this is when we were working on vehicles, but we didn't get paid for it. And I mentioned that earlier. If you're not going to make money, why work? I mean, I'd rather stay home with the kids and play games or something rather than working. What's really bad is when the work is done and we didn't get paid for it, which is another management problem. So again, if the proficiency is low, it's either low productivity, not spending enough time working and income-producing work, efficiency, not fast enough at it, or a combination of the both. I know I'm repeating that because it's necessary too. Our goal is that you sell a minimum of 9 hours based on an 8-hour day. Our goal is to sell 9 hours. Now, in a dealership, they would laugh at that. They would mock it. In many dealerships, they're 10, 11, 12, sometimes more hours in a day. Now, they have some advantages that we don't have. They have one animal. If it's a Toyota dealership, that's pretty much all they're working on. Now, sometimes they'll work on, something else, but it's usually the same manufacturer. So they have the same kind of vehicle coming in and out. And so there's pattern failures. I saw this last week, I saw it this week, and I know. Well, the way I say it is that as independent repair shops, it's different. The dealership has one animal and we have the entire zoo. Now, if you specialize, and I used to do a tremendous amount of work with Worldpac, which is, just for the record, my favorite parts company, bar none, is a lot of those people worked only on Mercedes or only on BMW or a combination maybe of those three. So it was a little bit more of a dealership alternative in that sense. The other thing is they're really good at selling maintenance. repair shops. We do too much repairs, I think, and not enough maintenance. There's some great ways, by the way. Patty and I worked on this and how to sell more maintenance, and I'm really looking forward to seeing how your next month goes with pre-booking appointments based on maintenance. So we've got some new ways of doing that, which, by the way, we're going to be covering in the selling class in Toronto, September 20 and 21. And we're going to be doing the same class in Hanover, and we're going to spend time on that selling maintenance and how to sell more of it. How do you calculate it? You take the sold time divided by the available time. Our goal is 112%. The math is really simple. If you, as a technician, are at the shop for 8 hours and you spend 90% of that day working on income-producing work, that's 7.2 hours. If you sell 9 hours in a day, you take the 9 hours sold and the 8 hours available, and you sold 112.5%. The question is, how can you increase productivity and efficiency? Now, I recommend that in your staff meetings, and we suggest that you have weekly staff meetings, and I don't mean W-E-A-K-L-Y. Some people's meetings are kind of weak, but you want to accomplish things in those meetings. Jeff, I know you have regular scheduled meetings. You do it, I think, every Thursday or whatever, and I recommend that. And here is a great discussion in a group of technicians, service advisors, managers, owners, or whatever combination you have. What can we do to increase productivity and efficiency? Now, there's only a few here. In our longer version of this, we spend a lot more time going through a lot more. We get input from the people in the session. And again, you're going to come up with some really good ideas with the technicians there and say, what can we do to spend more time? Again, productivity is more time on income producing work. I'll just go through a few of these with you. I'm just going to go through the top of my mind because there's probably 20 that could go here, but we don't have that time. We've only got 5 minutes left. Number one is pre-booking appointments. And the reason why that makes such a difference is because when you pre-book appointments, then you have the ability to be able to pre-order parts. Patty, who's in our group, and she's also in many ways my moderator on here, which I really appreciate. If you could just make a note for me to send off everybody, I'm going to send everybody the interview that I recorded recently with Jim Voigt. Jim Voigt is a shop owner, and I won't get into all the details. He'll speak for himself, but and I don't make stuff up. I don't exaggerate. He has hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of pre-booked appointments. Patty, we were talking earlier today. She has, I believe, I don't know, somewhere around 15 or 18, whatever, appointments already booked for September. 123, if I recall, appointments already for winter tires to be put on. There's a lot of things that you can pre-book appointments for, and it should be every job or every car every single time. But I can tell you that pre-booking appointments, unfortunately, is one of the least implemented things that shops do, and yet you can pre-order more of your parts. When you make an appointment for a person that's going to be, let's say, 6 months out for whatever, and again, I could spend 2 hours on the subject alone. We don't have time in a 1 hour session. But with that, then you know what they're coming in for. You call them, we suggest a week before to confirm, okay, Patty, you're coming in for your appointment next week. You're going to be able to make it. You say yes. Maybe it's an email, maybe it's a text, maybe it's a phone call, whatever. And the person says yes, well, now you can order the parts for that days in advance. And if it's not available right now today, it doesn't matter because you've got 3 or 4 days or maybe even 6 or 7 or whatever. The second thing that is really key here, I believe, is to have a work order rack flow system that you rely on written communication rather than verbal communication. The shop that I just mentioned to you that is doing not the 7-day-a-week shop, that's even worse, but the shop that I mentioned that they're selling about half their time, and they're working really hard at that. And again, they're not using a proper time card system. They use a one-time card thing. It's not a great system. But the problem there, and I spent 3 days doing an on-site at that shop, and the bottleneck is the shop foreman. No question about it. I can't tell you how many times that day I would look up and see a technician or walk by and see a technician or two standing there waiting for the shop foreman to tell them what they could do next. The shop owner said, and if that guy's gone for lunch or he's sick or whatever, they come to my door. He said, I hate it. They stand at the door with their hands in their pocket, and I yell at them, what are you standing there for? So they go stand in the bay. What's the difference? It's bothering you because you can see it. The point is the techs can't just go on to the next job without verbal communication. So having a work order rack flow system, a written communication, And too many shops, and one I was talking with again this morning, I said, how much of it's verbal? They said, all of it. Well, they can't just walk up and grab the next work order. They need to wait until that person's back from lunch or back from coffee break or, finishing a smoke break or off the phone or whatever. Number 3 is to be able to sell a lot more maintenance. When you sell a lot more maintenance, then you have the ability to schedule that different. And I don't just mean pre-booking appointments, but when a technician is working on a 4-hour factory recommended service, they're going to spend more of that time. Whereas if it's smaller stuff, then it's not going to be as much. Number 4 is you want to focus on increasing your hours per work order. I know that sounds simple, and it is. It's just not easy. The average independent repair shop only sells 1.2 to 1.5 hours per work order. That's horrible. Get it in, get it out. Get it in, get it out. Get it in, get it out. So if it's a bunch of small jobs, then you have a lot of time in between getting the vehicle out, getting the next one in, reading the work order, getting everything set up. So when you increase your hours per repair order, which is a selling issue, which, by the way, we're going to cover in great detail in the Hanover session and the Toronto session, I spent a lot of time in the last few months writing a whole bunch of new material on that. Efficiency is how fast the technician is. Now, there's so many things here. I'll just go off with 4. Number 1, I know I already mentioned it, but maintenance. The more maintenance that you sell, the faster your technicians will be. If you sell a bunch of grunt work, or worse than that, we don't really market. We don't ask people to come in for maintenance. We don't sell maintenance. I wrote a workshop years ago called Beyond Order Taking, and in a lot of shops, it's about order taking. It's not about selling. And if all we do is wait for customers' vehicles to break down, they come to us in a state of disrepair. The reason they're there is there's already something wrong. They're not coming in for a scheduled maintenance. The car's running fine. I want you to keep it running fine. They're there because they're in a breakdown situation, which means that you're going to need to diagnose something usually or inspect it. A good example of that would be the dentist office. When you have your hygiene appointment, you don't need to see the dentist each time you go in. You go right to the hygienist. But if you've got a really bad toothache, then you may need to go in and see the dentist to do the diagnosis and all the stuff that needs to be done there. Number 2, again, I already mentioned it, but pre-booking appointments. I'm looking at the best things that you could possibly do to increase the technician's efficiency. Number 3, I believe, is inspiring. And I know we think, well, we got to motivate people and we got to motivate people. I disagree with that. I don't believe that we can motivate people truly. I think we can inspire people and then motivate themselves. But if we don't inspire them, then they're usually not motivated. An example of that, for those of us that have had teenagers, it would be interesting on a school morning where I'd be, hey guys, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's get going, and you got to make sure you got something to eat there. And I'd be in the van honking the horn, let's go, let's go, let's go. But if it was a football practice, well, it was totally different. My son was ready. His gear was ready to go. He'd have it laid out the night before. He was so excited. And he'd be in the van honking the horn, Dad, let's go, let's go, let's go, because that was something that inspired him. So I think we need to inspire our employees. And the next one I'm just going to throw out here is, again, staff meetings. I want to encourage you to have staff meetings. People truly need to be inspired. People need to be part of a team. And the more of a team effort that you have, and that relates to another one here, is when they are working and helping each other because they're willing to do that. I'll help you, you help me, the job will get done faster, and when the other technicians are helping them out. Almost done here. So one thing I wanted to do is give you some what I call extra credit info, just with my compliments in addition to the things we just looked at. I do want to give you some benchmarks and ratios. Now, a lot of people that are on this or taking the recording are, in a sense, newbies. I don't mean new to the shop, but maybe new to this kind of training. And one thing that's been frustrating me, and I'm trying to see how I can fix it, is my experience is a lot of shop owners spend a massive amount of time learning how to repair cars. Some of the people on this call are in the U.S., some are in Canada. Well, in the U.S., there's no such thing as an apprenticeship program, a true apprenticeship program. Yes, there's ASC certifications, which means you know how to write tests, and I'm not saying it's not good. It is, but going to school and learning stuff hands-on and then back in the shop and doing it hands-on, back and forth. The average amount of time is about 8,000 hours to become a true licensed, sometimes a Red Seal licensed technician. Now, that's not everywhere in Canada. In the province of Quebec, there's no licensing program like we have throughout the rest of the country. But when you ask somebody, you're advertising for a licensed technician, they have to have their provincial license, which means they have to have banked so many hours in the shop. So they'll come to the shop. Jeff, you've got somebody, they're working at the shop, and then you lose them for a while as they go back to school, and that's painful, and they come back, and you're excited about that. But eventually, they're going to go on to be licensed, which again is about 8,000 hours. Just a quick story. I have a fellow in a shop in BC who is a licensed technician. He was a technician in a Honda dealer for 23 years before he started his own shop. He thought he was going to be making more money working for himself and working less. Now he's working more and making less. He's maybe billing out 5 hours a day. He can't afford an advisor. And I said to him, 5 hours a day, maybe 4, maybe 6. Now, you can do more, but, you need to be there for about 12 hours in order to bill out 7 or 8 hours. So it's about how much time are you willing to put in. I said, would you be satisfied in the dealership of making or billing out 5 or 6 hours a day? And he said, in a half a day. And I talked to his parts rep who knows him really well. I won't get into all the details of that. But I said, you know what? He's a brilliant technician. How much management training has he taken? He said, none. He's never once taken a management class. I had a fellow who had taken a webinar of ours, I don't know, maybe several months ago. It was a 2-hour webinar. Kevin from Gemcar had talked to him about it. He joined. It wasn't a complimentary one. It was one he paid for. And then Kevin said, oh, by the way, there's another webinar coming up. He said, I've already taken Kelly's webinar. There's another person who said, well, I just need to take a refresher. My brother, by the way, is a salesman. He's been selling paint for over 30 years. And he goes to training and he goes to training. And I said, you've learned it. He said, you know what? The worst thing to learn in training is something that you already know that you're not doing. And if you go and you get reminded, Patty was looking at selling maintenance, and she used to print off the factory recommended service, give it to the customer. She did it, stopped doing it because life's busy. And it just was really not that I tried to remind her. We brought it up, and she said, I used to do that. It was working great, and we stopped doing it, which is human nature. Anyway, so back to this, the benchmarks and the ratios. Our goal, sold hours per technician per day, I've already mentioned, is 9 hours in an 8-hour day, which would mean 112%, or people like Jeff who are quite anal retentive, which is a good thing. It's actually 112.5. Our goal with sales per month per technician is somewhere between 25 and 30, depending on your labor rate. I know people who consistently do $45,000 per month per tech. A lot of that has to do with the labor rate. I did not want to exaggerate it, but I know a shop that does $48,000 month in and month out, once in a while higher than that, a little bit lower, but the average. I don't mean his best month was 48,000, his consistent month is 48. But if I put that number there, you go, I don't know where that shop is, and their labor rate must be $200 an hour. And by the way, it's different where I'm at. Vehicle inspections, our recommendation is that we sell 1 to 2 comprehensive inspections in a day. We believe there's at least 21 opportunities to sell comprehensive inspections. And I'm not talking about an inspection with an oil change. While the oil's draining, we're talking about a bumper-to-bumper inspection, usually a 300-point inspection. Actually, in our management group, Patty's husband helped us with this, another member, Tony, and helped us update our comprehensive vehicle inspection. Factory recommended services, those need to be sold. Most people don't come in and buy maintenance. They come in to buy repairs, which is typically grunt work. But when we sell maintenance, our goal is to sell 1 to 2 factory recommended services in a day. And the appointments that Patty already has pre-booked for September are maintenance items. The customer knows they'll be coming in, whatever, let's say the week of September 7th to the 15th. Then we'll get a phone call the week before and say, by the way, just want to confirm your appointment next week. And they're all factory recommended services based on mileage. Labor to parts ratio, one of the most important things is making sure that your labor sales exceed your parts sales. I can tell you in our management groups, 100% in Canada at least, a little different in the US, not quite 100, 100% of the people when they join the group have more money in parts than labor. It's upside down. You hardly ever sell parts without labor. You oftentimes sell labor without parts. Labor is more profitable than parts, 75% gross profit on labor, 50% gross profit on parts. If you do the math here, and it's really simple, you simply take your labor sales for whatever period of time. Don't do this daily. It'll drive you crazy. That's micromanagement. Even weekly is not so much the case. Monthly for sure. But some months are off because you did a couple transmissions that month. But when you start to look at this data for the quarter, for the year, or the average year to date, that number is going to start to fall in place. So when I was writing this, a little extra stuff I put into here is I took a real shop, and their labor sales with a 2-technician shop for one specific month was $23,592 in labor, but they did $33,508 in parts. So that means that their parts was only, for every dollar they sold in parts, they only sold 70 cents in labor. So 70 cents in labor, or $7 out of 10, or 7 out of 10, 7 out of whatever you want to call it. It's the same math. It doesn't matter how big the number is. The ratio is what's important. Take your labor sales divided by your parts sales, and if you have a number less than 1, if in this case he's selling 70 cents in labor for every dollar in parts, that's completely upside down, which means he has the problem that we're looking at right here, is he's not maximizing his labor sales. Now, that shop's turned things around a fair bit since then. I went back to some data just for so last year. And then so the other stuff, again, this is extra credit stuff. And Patty, I said I might go over because if I add this stuff, but we want to sell 3 hours per repair order. We want to sell 6 times our labor rate. So if you sell 3 hours of labor, you should sell about 3 hours with the parts, sublet, tires, towing, shop supplies, and environmental fees. And so if you took your labor rate multiplied by 6, that's what we'd like to see as your average ticket. Some are higher, some are lower. Effective labor rate. How much of your labor rate did you actually collect? Our goal is 135%. I did a webinar recently just on that subject alone. We're just bite-sizing things here. And a few other things. Cost of goods sold, we believe, should be 40%. If your labor sales are not there, if you're not maximizing labor inventory, then your gross profit is going to be horrible. The cost of your technicians is going to be way too much compared to the labor sales. Your overall gross profit should be about 60%. The operating expenses should be about 40%, and your net profit should be about 20%. So with that, again, for people like Jeff, you've seen this kind of stuff before, Patty, but I wanted to focus on people that are kind of newbies to management training, and it's really about big picture. The idea is that you go back and perceive that labor is something you buy and something that you sell, and I want to encourage you to maximize your labor inventory. And again, we have our 2-day service advisor class coming up in Hanover, Ontario. That is going to be on a Tuesday and a Wednesday, 18th and 19th. And then the next day I'll be in Toronto on the 20th and 21st. Jeff, I commend you. You bought an airline ticket or paying for hotel for Zach to go to that. And I commend you for that. By the way, I've got a fellow in Toronto. When he saw the flyer, he said, Kelly, he phoned me, said, I want to have 4 people in that class. I said, 4? He said, yeah, I'm shutting down my shop for 2 days to go to your class, because he said, I've been to your stuff before and I know that we're going to make that money back in a very short period of time. That is rare. Have I seen it before? Yeah. What percentage of people do it? Maybe 1, maybe 0.5%. But the point is that you may have spent a lot of time learning how to fix cars, but you do need to spend time learning how to run a business. Some people think they're going to learn how to fix cars and spend 8,000 hours and then do a 2-hour webinar in business management and think that they've got it. No, I believe it's 40 hours a year of training for a technician to stay current. I believe it's 40 hours a year for a service advisor to stay current, and at least 40 hours of a year per year for an owner to stay current. With that, we're done. Thank you very much. And I will be downloading this. It takes a while. It has to be converted and then uploaded. I will be sending you the link. With that, if you have any questions, it's kelly@kellythecoach.com. Kelly@kellythecoach.com. If you have any questions about the upcoming training in Hanover or Toronto, please let me know. With that, thank you very much. Go back, kick butt, and maximize your labor inventory.